Let's say you're driving the family to that new restaurant you've been dying to try. You plug the address into your go-to navigation app.
Drive to highlighted route.
You get those turn-by-turn directions. Easy. You do it all the time. But this time, maybe that silky robotic voice gives you the wrong exit.
Turn right.
It sends you 20 minutes out of your way, and before you know it, you're completely lost. What do? Do you stop for a stranger's directions or pull out the old road atlas? Do they even make those anymore? If it's only a missed dinner, so what? But what if our easy navigation system suddenly didn't work? Or worse, what if it crippled our way of life?
Lost satellite connection.
I'm Jacob Carrozza, and you're listening to Now at Ohio State. We talk with researchers, innovators, and bold thinkers who look at our world, see what the real challenges are, and create the solutions that people need now. GPS, the Global Positioning System, is so heavily ingrained in our lives it's practically invisible. We use it to navigate our streets, fly our planes, even monitor crops and wildlife. And yes, it's fundamental to our military. Unfortunately, we're so reliant on GPS and similar navigational systems across the globe that they're the perfect target for hackers. The result of a major GPS attack could be anything from a frustrating drive to a conference, to billions of dollars lost, to even the loss of life. That's why we need people like Zach Cassis. Cassis is a professor in Ohio State's Department of Electrical and Computer Engineering, and he's the director of CARMAN, the Center for Automated Vehicle Research with Multimodal Assured Navigation through the U.S. Department of Transportation. He's using his expertise to create resilient strategies for our national navigation systems, finding backup methods for GPS if, and honestly when, it falters. Cassis sits down with our Todd Jones to discuss our reliance on GPS, its future, and how he and his collaborators are ensuring its safety.
Professor Cassis, thanks for joining us.
It's my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
We're going to talk about the Global Positioning System, GPS. Most people don't even know what GPS stands for, do they?
That's right. The original name was not GPS, it was Navstar.
What I think is so interesting about GPS is it's such a big part of our life, and yet we almost seem to just take it for granted, right? Think of all the ways that GPS impacts our lives.
Absolutely. You don't know that GPS is so important until I tell you cannot fly this plane, you cannot use your cell phone, you cannot have water coming out of your faucet, you don't have the power grid functioning properly, the stock market depends on timing from GPS. So really, it is an integral part of virtually every part of modern day life. But it's doing its job quietly in the background. And the moment it goes away, that's when you realize how dependent we are on it. But the good news is it's there, it's doing its job, and the world keeps functioning.
And that's where you come in. And that's where Ohio State comes in. And that's where the Center for Automotive Research comes in. In 2020, the federal government funded a Transportation Research Center consortium, and it's led by Ohio State. And the project was called CARMAN. And CARMAN was really focused on taking a look at GPS. So bad actors who want to practice, cyber attacks they can cause a lot of consequences.
They can. And that's what happens when you put all your eggs in one basket, as they say. You take down GPS, you don't have a backup system. And that's what we have been looking at is what backup systems can we find. Not if GPS goes down, it's when GPS goes down. And right now, we do not have a system that has the characteristics that GPS offers. We are working on some technology, and we've showed the promise of certain signals to replace GPS, and we are very excited about that. So for different modes of transportation, ground vehicles may be a little different in terms of challenges and requirements than aerial vehicles, than rail, than maritime. So what mitigation strategies, what backup systems can we come up with? And then now that we are moving to this world of automated vehicles or autonomous vehicles, whether self-driving cars or drones or urban air mobility, which is a fancy name for air taxi, think of an Uber that flies itself without a driver. Can we come up with a set of standards and protocols that a system has to abide by and has to follow before we integrate these systems into our daily lives, into our streets, driving side by side with human-driven vehicles, integrated into the national airspace, buzzing around us with no human in the loop? So how can we certify that? A cyber-resilient system where you and I can sleep at peace at night, knowing that this car that's driving itself in our neighborhood, if our children are running around, they won't be run over. So that's the vision for Carmen.
So what type of mitigation strategies did you discover?
So we started looking at what do we have around us, because I'm personally of the opinion that if there is something that we can use or reuse or repurpose, let's do that. Let's not continue building new systems that are dedicated for this or for that. So this is where this idea of let's be opportunistic about signals. You don't have a GPS signal. Well, we live in a very rich RF, radio frequency world, a world filled with signals. They are not intended for you to navigate with, like GPS, but if you are clever, you can use them. Cellular. We use our cellular phones more than we use anything else, probably technology-wise today. What we showed that cellular infrastructure, the digital infrastructure, offers you an alternative, and you really don't have to go and build a new infrastructure for that, which probably lobbyists would appreciate because that's how they make money and that's how, you have waste in the government. And we are saying, no, let's look, in our pantry. Can we make dinner tonight and, not buy a very fancy meal? I can make you a fancy meal. I have all the ingredients in-house. We have a very rich infrastructure. So cellular, we showed, is very promising for both aerial vehicles, high altitude, for drones. We navigated drones to decimeter level accuracy, which is what you get with GPS. And we also navigated ground vehicles to lane level accuracy.
And these options as a backup plan to GPS therefore give you a mitigation strategy if GPS endures a cyber attack.
That is absolutely right.
Now, the work has been so successful on Carmen that the federal government came back to Ohio State and says, hey, keep at it. Let's do some more of this. Let's expand on this work. And now we have a project called Carmen Plus, which started in 2023. Tell us a little bit about what Carmen Plus is, how it differs from Carmen, and what it hopes to accomplish.
For the next 5 years, we received a budget of $15 million to basically expand the scope from just GPS, because GPS is one, they call it sensing modality. It gives you one type of a signal that it helps you determine time and position and velocity, to other sensing modalities. So really, we are interested in anything that comes to the vehicle, right? Or the infrastructure, because we are looking at something we call HATS, highly automated transportation systems. So you have vehicles, you have infrastructure. Any signal that comes there, any sensor you have, is it safe? Can it be hacked? Is it vulnerable? And if so, how? And if so, what are the consequences? As you mentioned earlier, we depend on GPS in ways we don't even think about. You are bombarded with data, and the more we go into automated vehicles, then that data will be processed by a machine to make decisions on your behalf. I don't know about you, but I like to make my own decisions, right? And if I'm going to trust someone, aside from my wife, I want to make sure that person is trustworthy and that machine is trustworthy. Because if you can start infiltrating it, you can wreak havoc. For example, there was a study not too long ago that predicted hacking into only 10%. So as cars become connected, as cars become automated, and they are open to receiving signals and making decisions, if you hack only to about 10% of cars in Manhattan, it's enough to paralyze the city.
Really? Like the whole city?
Yeah, because think about it. Now you're talking about these big metallic junk that is sitting there. You can't go and remove it, right? A whole street filled with cars is just paralyzed. And then if you do it properly, you can start shutting down, like arteries to the city. And yeah, you can wreak havoc before you know it as we open up the system to getting any signal, right, that whether it's safe or unsafe, and the car makes the decision and overrides you. And even if you override it, it may be too late.
And so much of this gets back to cybersecurity, correct?
That is correct. So once again, people are fantasizing about, and I understand that, sleeping behind your wheel while the car takes you to work. Do you want to do that if you know that the car is vulnerable? And the systems today, you'll be surprised, as they say, if you see how sausage is made, you won't eat sausage. The systems today are easy to fudge with, easy to play with, easy to mess with, easier than some people think. And you have lots of people with nefarious intent that would find this ripe for whether they are just individual bad actors or state bad actors or terrorist organizations that expose these vulnerabilities and take full advantage of it.
So your team and Carmen Plus is really trying to find ways that you could mitigate the bad actors and what they could cause, find the vulnerabilities and find answers to what we could do to make sure that these things are safe. Professor Casas, I really enjoyed this conversation about GPS and cybersecurity and autonomous vehicles. I've learned a lot, and I really want to thank you for your time and your expertise.
I appreciate you inviting me. It was my pleasure.
If you want to understand how crucial Casas's work is, you don't need to look into a future with self-driving cars and flying taxis. Just look at the news. Over the skies and in the waters of the Baltic region in Europe, and in the Middle East, tens of thousands of pilots and ship captains have been combating GPS attacks for years. These spoofing attacks, which we'll explain in a moment, tie back to conflicts in Ukraine and in Gaza. That's because GPS and global navigation satellite systems around the world are critical to military operations, from pinpointing an enemy's location to directing drones away from civilians. Just imagine what cyber warfare could be without people like Casas securing our systems. Well, Mark Bartman imagines it. Bartman is a retired Air Force 2-star general and an Ohio State alum. He began his military career as a fighter pilot and ended it as the adjutant general in charge of the Ohio National Guard and a member of the governor's cabinet. He uses his extensive experience in the cybersecurity and STEM fields for Ohio State's College of Engineering and the university's Enterprise for Research, Innovation, and Knowledge, better known as ERIC. Our own Franny Lazarus sits down with Bartman to discuss how GPS has changed military tactics and what the challenges are to cybersecurity experts.
Mark, thank you for joining me today. So if you could, I'd love for you to walk me through the evolution of the usage of GPS in military conflict.
So GPS came about not too long after World War II, but it wasn't referred to as GPS. But it was developed as part of the U.S. government as a way to increase what we would now refer to as position, navigation, and timing. Because anytime you're navigating anywhere around the globe, you want to make sure that you get from point A to point B, and you actually show up at point B when you're supposed to be at point B on time. Or if, of course, in the military sense, if you're trying to deliver a weapon or something in a particular area, you want to be precise about how you deliver that weapon. So when you think back to World War II, and there's been some recent episodes on TV about the Bloody Hundredth, if you know what I'm referring to, from World War II and in England at the time, where they would put up hundreds and hundreds, right, of B-17s over Germany and Europe at that time, and have just massive losses of airmen. So there was thinking, of course, even as far back as then, is how do we become more precise in the way that we can deliver ordnance and get bombs on target, essentially. When I first started using GPS, which was back in around the mid-1980s when I was flying F-16s out of Luke Air Force Base in Phoenix, Arizona, We had GPS receivers that were built into the aircraft at the time. The problem was, though, at that time, they only had a few of the satellites that were up in orbit. And so we were very limited, actually, to the time of day that we could use it. So there was an early version of a computer program that would tell us when the satellites were going to be overhead and when we'd be able to access them and use them for navigation and timing. And then, of course, as they got more and more satellites launched into space and completed out the constellation of what we have now, 21 satellites that are up there that provide precise navigation and timing to everybody.
I have some technical questions for you. What does jamming a GPS mean?
So jamming essentially would mean that you're denying the signal to a receiver. So you have the satellite up in space and you have a receiver on the ground. And if you're jamming the signal, then that receiver is not able to receive it. And so thus you don't have GPS capability, or you don't have the capability for that precision guidance for whether it's driving your car or whether it's dropping a bomb on a target.
And another term I've heard is spoofing. What is spoofing?
So the difference between really jamming and spoofing is more about moving the signal so that your accuracy is degraded. So instead of, if I drop a bomb with a GPS receiver on it, I should be able to expect, if there's no interference whatsoever, that bomb is probably going to land pretty close to the target, usually within 10 or 15 feet, something like that, which is close enough for pretty much any type of the target that you're going to go after. If you're spoofing the signal, and I don't know that somebody is spoofing the signal, then I drop this bomb, and it could miss by maybe 500 feet or even more, but I don't know that it's being spoofed because there's technology out there that can do that, and they can hide those signals so that it makes it very difficult for me or for any operator really to be able to determine whether or not the signal is being spoofed.
What are the concerns around GPS in military conflict?
Well, obviously, we talked a little bit about spoofing or jamming, and those are the two biggest concerns. Again, because when you're delivering any kind of weapon, whether it's from an airplane or from a ship or from the ground, and it's using GPS for navigation to be able to get to whatever the target happens to be, is that if it loses the signal during its flight period, then it's probably not going to hit the target that you're aiming for. It could end up going anywhere. I would say that in today's conflicts and really over the last probably 20 years in Iraq and Afghanistan, we were very focused on trying to minimize collateral damage to civilian populations. If you're using a very precise type of a weapon that's using the capabilities that GPS brings to you, and somebody jams that signal or spoofs the signal so that it doesn't land where you are expecting it to land, that's when you start increasing potential damage to the general population. And, the bad guys know that, right? So they do that for a number of reasons. Number one, because they don't want, some high-value target that they're trying to protect damaged. But number two is that if they can make it look like you're actually trying to target a civilian population, that just makes it much more complicated from both the policy and the military side to be able to prosecute whatever the conflict is that you're trying to do out there, because that potentially has the risk of changing, right, the general population's view of what it is that you're doing for that. So I think those are some considerations that our senior leaders are always having to think about anytime that we're using any kind of ordnance. Again, it doesn't matter how it's delivered, but if it's using GPS guidance.
What is the better use of military resources? Either finding different ways to deliver weapons, things that don't rely on GPS, or bolstering GPS technology to minimize the threats that it's susceptible to?
Right. So obviously in an unconstrained world, we would do both. We know that funding is a limitation, and Congress obviously has a big part to play in how the military is funded, as well as research at universities. We need to think about the best use of our funding. So the current satellites that we use as part of the GPS constellation are in the geosynchronous orbit, so they're out very far away from Earth. So the further the satellite is away from Earth, the potential easier, I know that's not a technical term here in this case, but the easier it probably is to try to either jam or spoof that signal, because it can be intercepted by very smart people that have other satellites that are closer to the Earth. The other side of that coin then, of course, would be to provide funding to be able to do research at places like here at Ohio State as ways to, is there technology that can be developed or can be incorporated into the software that's in our current GPS satellites or into new satellites that get sent up into orbit that would make them much more difficult to either jam or spoof the type of signal for that. So, and I think some combination probably of those two is probably usually the best solution. A lot of times when you put all of your eggs in one basket, as we have done over our history, we sometimes tend to find that that's not the best solution. So I think some combination of the two is probably the best way to go.
When you think about the future, what are the concerns that you have related to GPS?
Well, I think it's the technology and where we're at, right, is always advancing. Mm-hmm. Technological advances don't just stop as people are playing around in their garages or wherever they happen to be and coming up with amazingly incredible ideas. And of course, the other thing is artificial intelligence, right? As AI is adopted and further integrated into everything that we do on a day-to-day basis, whether that's, here at Ohio State University when it comes to teaching, or whether that's within the military and the Department of Defense and how they're going to use artificial intelligence. I think we have got to continue to try to figure out what's the right solution and how do we move forward, because the last thing you want to do is just ignore something.
Mark, you're an Ohio State alum, and now you work with students at the university, specifically at the College of Engineering. How does it feel to come full circle?
That's really great. So the funny thing is, of course, when I was a student here, I went through Air Force ROTC, and I was much more focused, let's put it this way, I was much more focused on Air Force ROTC than I was on my academic studies.
Okay.
So nowadays, to be able to come back and see the quality of the students that we have here, it just absolutely blows me away all of the time. So I'm mentoring a group of students right now that have a startup out of the College of Engineering that are working on some additional funding. And I've done that now for a number of different startup groups and individuals here at Ohio State over the last 5.5 years since I retired from the Air Force. But it's a lot of fun. And it really sort of keeps me energized because I get to see what the future really does look like when it comes to innovation and technology development here in this country. Because for anybody out there, I think that is concerned about that or is worried about where we're going, is that you really shouldn't be, is that the quality of the students we have in these universities, and particularly here at the Ohio State University, are absolutely amazing.
Well, thank you so much for joining us today. I've really enjoyed our conversation.
Absolutely. Happy to be here. Thanks, Rennie.
Are our navigation systems vulnerable? They sure are. But here's a reason for optimism. Those pilots who've been flying high in European skies, dealing with all that spoofing, they had backup plans, alternate ways to navigate the skies. They got everyone home safely. That's exactly what CASAS is doing for the US GPS system. And those are the scenarios that Bartman and Ohio State students train for every day. Because cyber attacks aren't about to disappear. Thankfully, neither are people like CASAS or Bartman, people solving the problems of today and tomorrow so we can cruise through our daily lives. Get to that restaurant, make that flight destination. Keep our children safe on our streets and in our homes. Now at Ohio State is produced by The Ohio State University's Office of Marketing and Communications. For more information, visit us at go.osu.edu/now. I'm your host, Jacob Carrozza. Thanks for listening.